Hey guys! Tonight we tiptoe barefoot through the velvet hush of a forgotten palace, where every candle flickers in tune with a breath you can barely hear. You pause in the corridor just outside the music chamber, where the walls sweat rosewater and the carpets muffle even your heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, an instrument sighs in the dark, slow and trembling, not unlike a cat curled in a sunbeam. And yes, tonight's story really is about Ottoman musicians tuning their instruments to match the breath of a sleepy cat. You probably won't survive this level of delicate weirdness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where on earth we're falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the cool stillness of the Topkapi Palace's quieter wing, the one no diplomat ever entered and no soldier ever guarded. This wing belonged to music and to cats. Not officially, of course. The official inventory only listed things like ebony flutes, pearl-studded timbres, and sheet music written in lemon ink. But unofficially, the cats ruled it. A marmalade tabby dozes in the crook of a cello case, one paw twitching in time with some imagined dream. The player, an elderly man with silvery eyebrows and a back like a question mark, crouches nearby not to tune, not yet, but to watch. He's timing her breath. Inhale, pause, exhale, rest. You'd think this was an exaggeration. You'd think no empire that ruled from Hungary to Yemen would allow something so frivolous. And yet, historians still argue whether this cat tuning was a rare eccentricity or a widespread philosophy in the court's music school. We do know that some 19th century Ottoman manuscripts contain detailed guidelines for sympathetic tuning, including tempo suggestions based on the pulse of a sleeping mammal. The cat was simply convenient. You crouch beside the cellist, and it's not the rhythm that strikes you first. It's the silence. Every musician here waits. They do not speak. Even the page-turners for the sheet music stand like statues. The room's atmosphere is not tense, but reverent. The cat exhales. The old man hums a low E and plucks the string to match it. The palace cats weren't just pets. They were familiars. Some swore they could predict whether a musical piece would succeed or fail based on which cat chose to sleep in the rehearsal room. Black cat by the window. Ominous. Striped tabby under the dulcimer. Divine approval. A long-haired calico sitting in the tambourine. Cancel the whole concert, too much chaos. One traveler from Venice recorded a rehearsal in 1762, stunned that an entire orchestra halted because the imperial orange beast rolled onto its side and yawned. He thought it a joke, until the conductor, a tall man in indigo robes with a crescent-shaped scar on his chin, nodded and said plainly, "She has changed her rhythm. So must we." They weren't tuning to the notes. They were tuning to the breath behind the notes. That nearly imperceptible, involuntary rise and fall, subtle, soft, full of grace. It was called nefes ayara in Ottoman Turkish, literally the breath adjustment. But some whispered a nickname, the cat's ghost, because the breath would drift from player to player like a haunting. Barely their signal. You stand now in the corner, back against a carved sandalwood pillar, watching. A flute made from reed is lifted to a musician's lips, not to play, but to exhale through. A test. The reed does not vibrate, not quite. He tries again. The tabby flicks an ear. He stops. The conductor nods. That means it's working. You shift your weight slightly, and a floorboard groans. The nearest violinist glares at you as if you farted during a funeral. Even in your socks, even in your stillness, you feel too loud here. In the back of the room, a small charcoal brazier glows with cardamom and clove. The scent swirls like a low harmony. Music here isn't just heard, it's inhaled. The instruments made of apricot wood, camel gut, hammered brass are meant to vibrate gently into the body, not blast out like some Western war trumpet. This music doesn't declare it dissolves, but only if it's in rhythm. And the cat, finally, is breathing steadily again. The musicians begin, not abruptly, like in a concert hall, but slowly. First a thread of sound from a bowed commencee, then the faint pluck of a qanun string, then the sigh of the ney, a flute said to mimic the very breath of the world. The sounds wind together like incense smoke. The melody isn't so much played as coaxed. They're not reading from sheet music. They're watching the cat. One slow inhale, one note. One gentle exhale, another. The rhythm is not in time. It's in being. One scholar once joked that if the Ottomans had ruled France, the metronome would have been shaped like a purring kitten instead of a clockwork pendulum. He wasn't far off. You sit cross-legged now, the music cradling you like the cat's tail curled against her nose. There's no rush. There never was. You could sit here forever if your own breath stays slow enough not to disturb the mood, but good luck with that. The tabby doesn't move, but the music shifts. You barely notice it at first, a half note lower here, a shimmer of dissonance there. It's like watching a reflection on water tilt just slightly in the wind. The cat's belly rises a little faster now. Something in her sleep has changed. Perhaps a dream involving fish, or the eternal grudge she holds against the apricot tree she fell from last week. And like loyal disciples of an invisible oracle, the musicians adjust, not with panic, not even with thought, just subtle fingertip corrections, gentler bow pressure, a shift in embouchure that would go unnoticed unless you were already tuned to the idea that music itself could breathe. You follow the flow of silk, long outer robes that trail across the floor like smoke trails after a candle's been snuffed. These musicians are not dressed like common street players. These are court artists, handpicked by the imperial overseer of music, a man who once claimed the power to hear sour notes in his sleep. Their outer garments and taras embroidered with gold thread and faded tulip patterns barely whisper as they move. And moving. Now, they are, the melody, if you could even call it that, rises as they begin to walk, a slow processional in concentric circles around the cat. It looks ridiculous. At first, grown men pacing in reverence around a sleeping animal, but something in the weight of their steps, the hush of their tones, tells you this is no parody. This is performance as prayer. You step back as they move past, catching the faint scent of clove, sweat, and something oddly metallic bronze polish. Perhaps, from the cymbals stacked by the wall, the ney player exhales, matching the cat again. The canon plucks out a tone so faint it's almost imagined, and then like a bird falling through silence, a breath catches. The cat hiccups, a full-body twitch. Her ears splay, her tail curls. For 1 second, time breaks, and then the music collapses into laughter. Quiet, warm, familiar laughter. The oud player shakes his head and mutters something about that damn fish dream again, and someone else chuckles about feeding her too many sardines before rehearsal. Historians still argue whether this whole ritual was music theory or myth-making. Some say the cat was simply a mascot, and the tuning merely symbolic, a way to remind players to keep breath at the center of rhythm. Others insist the tradition dates back centuries, passed from one court to the next, refined during the reign of Murad III, when mystical philosophy and art blurred beyond recognition. What's clear is this: Ottoman musicians believed in the silken thread between breath and tone. To them, the lungs mattered more than the sheet music. And not just human lungs, the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of any living creature especially. One unburdened by reason was seen as the purest conductor of tone. You trail after the flute player, who's now tuning his reed beside a pool in the open-air garden. It's late, but the palace lanterns flicker in symmetrical rows, casting golden reflections on the water. Somewhere behind a hedge, you hear another cat, this one wide awake and meowing, as though she's debating a diplomat. In the garden, the air changes. The scent of jasmine and night-blooming tuberose wraps around your head like a lullaby. The flute player crouches again, not to tune, but to breathe. 4 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds out. Repeat. Breath becomes measure. He lowers the reed to his lips. The sound is soft, rounded, almost apologetic. You feel it in your rib cage, not your ears. One of the younger musicians, a boy barely old enough to shave, tiptoes toward a tall basket near the lattice wall. He slowly lifts the lid and retrieves another cat, a jet-black kitten with a single white paw. The kitten blinks, utterly unimpressed, and settles into the boy's arm like royalty. He places it gently onto a cushion in the center of the tiled courtyard, murmurs a quick apology for the disturbance, and backs backs away. You're not sure if this new cat is a replacement, a co-conductor, or simply next in line for dreams. A fringe theory proposed by a German scholar with a fondness for pipe smoke and implausible footnotes suggests that palace musicians believed cats could hear music humans couldn't. Not just high frequencies, but emotional harmonics, vibrations tied not to pitch, but to memory. If a note made the cat flick her tail, that was feedback. If she slept through it, that was harmony. A thin woman with wide sleeves and calloused fingertips begins plucking the sand to her mallets wrapped in silk to soften the strike. The sound flutters outward like moth wings. Another musician joins in, his rebab sighing across the lower registers. The kitten curls its tail and purrs. Again, the ensemble adjusts. You wonder how often this happened. How often court composers sat beneath moonlit awnings, writing pieces that only worked when the cat approved. One surviving letter from a palace scribe complained that the entire Friday performance was delayed because the imperial orange had a grudge against the oud. Whether metaphor or mischief, we'll never know, but you can't help but notice the respect they offer her now. Not worship, not superstition, something quieter, like they're afraid to wake whatever dream she's having, and more afraid to admit they need her breathing to find the right key. As the night draws deeper and the wind changes just enough to lift the edge of your robe, you feel your own breath sinking with the ensemble, not in pitch, not even in rhythm, just in presence. You exhale, they play, the kitten yawns. You're starting to get it. The robe closet smells like lavender and something older, maybe cedar dust, maybe the breath of 10,000 hushed performances. You're not supposed to be here. The musicians call this space the tuning hollow, though officially it's listed on the floor plan as a linen alcove. It's neither linen nor an alcove. It's more of a holy site for musical oddities, a cramped chamber just off the royal rehearsal hall where every instrument not in use waits, suspended like sleeping birds from ceiling hooks, or nestled inside thick wool-lined drawers, and tucked between a cracked mandolin and a tray of tuning keys, a drawer labeled Sultan's Sock Drawer. You open it. Inside are 3 mismatched socks, one embroidered with a sunburst, one plainly Ottoman navy, and one with a tiny stitched cat's face near the cuff. And beneath them, laid out with the care of a relic, are tuning forks, not your average ones. These are etched in Ottoman calligraphy and fitted with tiny bronze plaques naming specific palace cats. You find one marked Saffron, 1754, and another, Mahir's Breath, not tail. You blink, then read that last one again. Mahir's Breath, not tail. Apparently, not all parts of the cat offered proper tuning calibration. You chuckle softly, then freeze, remembering that chuckles can echo. A lute somewhere to your left groans in protest. Historians still debate whether these cat-labeled forks were symbolic, each meant to capture the essence of a moment, or whether they were literally tuned in real time, matching the breath pattern of the feline in question. No one's sure how one would even go about measuring a cat's exhale without getting scratched. You brush your hand over a tray of oud strings labeled untested, possibly cursed, and you begin to realize this place is more than a storage room. It's a museum of experiment. Tuning here wasn't just precision, it was poetry. One fringe record scribbled by a bored Dutch translator stationed in Istanbul in 1812 claims a particular cat named Sümbül once refused to purr during a rehearsal, unless the kanun was retuned a full quarter step flatter. The players grumbled, adjusted, and only then did Sümbül return to her cushion, sighing like a satisfied critic. That version of the piece went on to become part of the royal wedding procession that spring. You move deeper into the hollow, stepping over a stack of cracked frame drums and a curious bowl filled with goat hair. A handwritten tag identifies it as tail trimmings for winter tuning. Apparently, the consistency of cat hair was occasionally braided into string for bowed instruments, especially in colder months when humidity changed how wood resonated. You run your finger along the edge of a narrow flute box. Someone's carved a tiny paw print into the lid. It's around this time that your eye catches a thick, leather-bound ledger on a slanted shelf. You open it. Page after page of handwritten notes, none in neat rows, all in sprawling spirals, diagrams, ink blots. The margin of one page reads, "Cat slow, dream rhythm." Unclear. Retry after fish. You snort again. The instruments groan again. You begin to suspect they really are listening. There's a strange intimacy to this collection. Each item seems less like a tool and more like a personality waiting to be remembered. One tambourine has a chip along the rim with a small sewn patch of silk tied to it. A note says, "Do not remove." This chip plays sharp if exposed. This wasn't just storage, it was memory. You turn, and suddenly, the light dims. A musician has stepped into the doorway, blocking the lantern glow behind him. He doesn't scold you, just smiles gently and holds out his hand for the tuning fork you're still holding. You pass it over, and he bows not to you, but to the fork. Saffron's breath was very still. He murmurs, "She was ill that week." This fork plays a little sorrow. He presses it gently against the rosewood edge of his tambour, strikes it, listens, then adjusts his strings in the dark. You follow him out, back into the rehearsal hall, where the kitten now sleeps in a sunspot that no sun has touched for 3 hours. A lantern's been positioned just right to mimic the warmth. The musicians are gathering again, and the conductor adjusts a velvet pillow under the kitten's head. You realize now, the tuning was never just about the sound. It was about stillness, the kind of stillness only a fully relaxed creature can achieve. And the Ottoman musicians, they wanted their instruments to match that serenity. One composer called it the art of the unsung hush music so quiet, even a sleeping cat wouldn't stir. A performer wraps silk ribbon around his finger before plucking a string. Another coats the surface of his frame drum with rosewater, not for scent, but to soften the tone. Every gesture feels like an apology to the air. You take a seat near a window, listening now not for the notes, but for the breath beneath them. The kitten twitches in a dream. A flautist exhales, "Aish." To match. The piece begins again. You swear you can hear the sock drawer vibrating in tune. The cat blinks once, sighs, and the room holds its breath with her. You're seated cross-legged now on an embroidered floor cushion, so plush it feels like sinking into a pastry. The music has paused not due to mistake, not due to exhaustion, but due to a disagreement of high philosophy, the kind that only happens in palaces filled with musicians who've had too much cardamom tea and too much time to argue about the soul of tone. The question before them: should the rhythm be drawn from the cat's breath or her purring? You watch the ensemble divide itself not by instrument but by allegiance. The breath traditionalists settle on the left, aged, slow-speaking, fond of sighing mid-sentence. On the right, the purr enthusiasts, mostly younger, mostly rhythm players, mostly convinced that vibration is superior to air. The cat, of course, offers no opinion. She lies on her back, exposing a soft, scandalous belly to the high-domed ceiling and the scrutiny of musicologists. A harpist speaks first. Breath is consistent. It mirrors the neigh. A percussionist snaps back. Purring is internal vibration. It's the same root as resonance. And she purrs in tempo. An old man in the corner mutters. She purrs when she likes the music, not when you demand it. You want to tune to a compliment. You half expect someone to break out a scroll of ancient law, and lo, someone does, a faded folio, worn with time and covered in what looks suspiciously like cat scratches. It contains a ruling from the Court of Cultural Rights, stating in deliberately vague prose that one may draw measure from breath or hum, so long as the source remains feline and unbothered. Historians still argue whether this decree was intended seriously or sarcastically. Some believe it was drafted after a particularly rowdy night at the Mevlevi Lodge involving hashish, a hurdy-gurdy, and a cat named Sumbul who refused to stop purring for 2 hours straight. You lean closer as the debate warms. A lutenist graying but sharp argues that breath contains pauses, rests, and microholds that add nuance to rhythm. Purring is endless, he says, and endlessness is boring. The young drummer scoffs. Endlessness is divine. You almost expect someone to shout, but instead, a flute sounds. Quiet, cautious, almost curious. A compromise. No, an experiment. The flautist stands and begins to play in time with both the rise and fall of breath and the underlying purr beneath it. He lets one lead, then the other. You can almost hear the decision-making. Now follow breath. Now follow hum. Back and forth, like waves trying to match the rhythm of wind and tide. The rest join in, slowly, not with consensus. but with curiosity, one string at a time, one drum beat whispered into silk-covered palms. And for a moment, it works. The music becomes layered. A top note that exhales, a bottom pulse that hums, and the kitten, snoring softly now, becomes a metronome. No mechanical clock could ever rival. You're not imagining it. You feel the cat in the music. One fringe scholar, a French archivist stationed in Istanbul in the 1880s, wrote that a properly trained palace musician could determine the species of the tuning animal just by the shape of the melody. Dog-tuned music, too panting, monkey, erratic, but cat tune, balanced, sleepy, indifferent to applause. You shift your posture and glance out the nearby stained glass window. Beyond the courtyard, you see 3 other cats lounging on the warm marble steps. Not one moves. Not one acknowledges the ongoing debate inside, and somehow, you know they don't need to. Inside, the conductor raises his hand. The music halts mid-hover. Like a leaf caught in a breeze, he looks to the cat, still purring. He looks to the ensemble, waiting. Then, calmly, he says, "Follow her mood, not her method." A silence spreads like warm honey across the room. That is new. Mood, not breath, not purr. Something softer, deeper, and harder to imitate. You feel the tension release from the shoulders of the traditionalists and the enthusiasts alike. No one has to win. The cat remains the compass. They've simply stopped staring at the needle. One nay player whispers, "Then we must listen with more than ears." A harpist nods, "We must tune our hearts." Someone else mutters, "Poetic nonsense." But they're already adjusting their grip. The conductor raises his hand again. A nod. The music begins anew, different this time. Less measured. More like a dance with a ghost. A ribbon caught in slow wind. You watch the players, their bodies moving more fluidly now, no longer trying to match the cat, but letting the cat be the gravity their sounds orbit around. And as for the cat, she stretches, opens one eye, and promptly rolls over. The mood has changed. So does the music, and you, without meaning to breathe with her. By now, you've learned not to trust the tempo. Just when you think the rhythm is steady, when the breath has synced, when the purr has faded into the floorboards, something shifts. A garden door creaks, a lantern hisses, a cat sneezes, and the entire ensemble rewrites the universe to match it. You've left the rehearsal room behind, drawn into the garden of scent and sound. No signs mark the entrance. No guards watch its pathways. You find it by following the faint trail of citrus and oud oil, and the occasional flick of a tail disappearing behind a laurel hedge. The garden is a strange hybrid, part orchard, part stage, part living instrument. Grapevines climb lattice work like staves in a symphony. Stone benches are etched with musical notation. Even the orange trees have mirrors hung between their branches so musicians can watch themselves and the sky at the same time. It's midnight, and the cats are napping like gods, reclining on warm stones, stretched across cushions, tucked inside broken drums used as planters, and not a single one cares about your presence. Not even a flick of an ear. The musicians tread softly. Their sandals barely disturb the sand-dusted stones. This is no longer rehearsal. This is reverence. A nightingale begins to sing. Not perform, sing, wild, uninvited. From a perch in the pomegranate tree, it trills once, pauses, and waits. The flautist answers. A single breath into the neigh, curling into the air like smoke from rosewood. The bird responds, higher now, 3 notes, staccato. The qanun joins in with a shimmer. And then the garda becomes a conversation not between humans and animals, but between things that understand tone better than they understand power. Historians still argue whether this garden was designed as an acoustic experiment or a meditative retreat. Some suggest it was the Sultan's private project, built not for beauty but for sound calibration. A place where music could echo and vanish exactly how it was meant to. Others believe it evolved by accident, when musicians simply kept returning, bringing cats and flutes and quiet arguments with them. You stroll past a stone bowl filled with crushed mint leaves. Its scent wafts up as the breeze stirs. Nearby, a basket of folded fabrics meant to muffle drumheads in case a sleeping cat was too close during a rain rehearsal. Someone once tried to build a covered pergola to keep the cats dry. The cats revolted. You take a seat beside a sloping fountain, the water barely louder than the pulse in your ears. Two cats rest nearby, one half curled around a tambourine, the other snoring on the page of sheet music. Neither has been moved. The page is simply rewritten around her. The flautist returns, not with sheet music, but with a handful of lemongrass and lavender stems, which he folds and places inside the mouth of his instrument. The smell will change the breath. The breath will change the tone. The tone, in theory, will keep the cats asleep. One fringe theory dismissed by most scholars, but lovingly preserved in the footnotes of an overly poetic Armenian musicologist, claims the cats were scent-sensitive to certain chords. That a G minor played near a bowl of crushed clove would always put them to sleep. That a D sharp paired with cinnamon made them restless. Unprovable, of course, but you do notice that every player here carries herbs in their sleeves. Just in case, a musician begins to hum not a song, but a syllable, a single note, extended. You feel it in your spine before you even register the sound. It's not loud. It's just right. The nightingale falls silent. One cat stretches. The canon strikes a soft chord. And now, the real performance begins. No stage, no audience, no applause. Just music woven from breath, humidity, and a small orchestra of living things asleep in sun-warmed shadows. You think of the phrase you overheard earlier, the art of the unsung hush. This is it. No melody leads, no instrument dominates. Even the silence is part of the score. You watch as a girl no older than 16, an apprentice, by the look of her, strums a note, frowns, then adjusts the tension in her string. She doesn't ask a teacher. She asks the cat at her feet. It blinks once and closes its eyes again. She nods, satisfied. The tuning is good. The moon hangs over the lattice roof like a silent conductor. You stretch your legs across a warm patch of tile, trying not to disturb the tiny black kitten curled near your sandal. It's purring, and your heartbeat starts to fall into sync. The music, if you can call it that anymore, is like a dream. You're aware you're dreaming. You remember earlier how the cat hiccuped and derailed a rehearsal, how players argued over purrs versus breath, and now, here in the garden, it's as if none of it ever mattered. Not because it was wrong, but because the cat simply doesn't care. And in not caring, she teaches the most important rule of all: play with grace, or don't play at all. You close your eyes for just a moment, letting the scent of basil and warm strings lull you into that same forgiving stillness. You don't even notice that the kitten's purr has stopped. Not because it's gone, because you've matched it. You follow the sound of bells, not chimes, not ceremonial gongs, but something smaller, mischief-sized. You step through a low stone archway carved with faded poetry, and into a hall of whirling cloth and scented oil. The ceiling spins above you, painted with golden spirals and muted turquoise, as if the very architecture were mid-turn. Here, in the circular floor of polished cedar, Sufis once danced in silence until the breath of the world revealed its rhythm. Tonight, though, the floor belongs to a single man and a very loud cat. He stands barefoot, arms folded inside his dervish robe, white linen wound tight across his chest, beard braided neatly down to his collarbone. His eyes are closed, the cat striped, round, loud paces impatiently in circles at his feet. She meows, then meows again, then meows like she's just learned the concept of opera. A novice tries to shoo her away. The man lifts a finger without opening his eyes. Let her speak. The hall falls silent. The story you've wandered into is one whispered among the more theatrical Sufis. Those who believed enlightenment came not only through stillness, but through absurdity. They tell of a dervish named Halim, a man who had not spoken aloud in 7 years. Not out of trauma or pride, he simply found words too sharp for prayer. But one night, as a thunderstorm cracked across the Bosphorus, and the musicians retuned their drums to the heartbeat of the rain, a cat wandered into the lodge. Halim bent to offer it a corner of his robe and instead let out the perfect imitation of a meow. Clear, open-throated, measured. The musicians paused. The wind held still. The cat, stunned, blinked and sat, and Halim meowed again. Historians still argue whether this tale was metaphor, mockery, or miracle. Some believe Halim's meow was merely a cough mistaken for mysticism. Others insist that the cat began to purr in rhythm with the dervish's hums, and that Halim took his first vow of melody that very night. You watch now as his descendant, whether spiritual or actual is unclear, begins to spin, slowly at first, then faster, then not at all. It's one of those paradoxes of Sufi movement. A man in motion so fluid, you stop seeing the turn and start hearing it. The cat meows again. This time, he replies, not with voice, with breath. He exhales sharply through his nose, matching the length of the meow. Then again, until their rhythm overlaps. Not quite music, not quite mimicry, just resonance. A ney player joins quietly from the corner, his first note. A sigh. You feel in your fingertips. A frame drum joins, lightly brushed with fingertips slick with rose water. The cat lies down. Halim's successor slows. You're watching a duet that never claims to be one. A fringe theory found scrawled on the back of a forgotten treatise on geometry suggests that Sufi musicians sometimes studied cats not just for breath, but for improvisational courage. A cat never hesitates before leaping. A true improviser does the same. Breathe, leap, land or don't, either way, it's divine. The flutist now plays only during the cat's blinks. A game, a ritual, a deeply impractical performance metric. You're not sure, but it's mesmerizing. The dervish begins to sing wordless, low, and the melody loops like thread through velvet. You don't understand the language because there is none. It's the language of purring made human. The cat stretches, yawns, and falls asleep. The song ends, and still, you're not sure if it ever began. A musician nearby chuckles. She gave him 4 notes tonight. Last week, it was 5. The hall begins to breathe again. Tea is poured. Slippers shuffled. One player tucks his drum beneath his arm like a baby. You realize no sheet music has appeared. Everything tonight was improvised around the mood of a feline who now dreams. Mouth twitching, paws paddling through invisible grass. The conductor enters last, nods to Halim's air, and surveys the room. His gaze lingers on you, not in warning, not in question, just in shared absurdity. Then he kneels and begins to tune his instrument, slowly, gently, in rhythm, once again, with the cat's breath. And you sit still, letting the silence tune you. 2. You find yourself crouched near a wash basin, watching a man pick cat hair off an oud string with the seriousness of a heart surgeon. His brows are furrowed. His mouth is set in that universal "don't talk to me until I fix this" expression. Each strand is lifted with a pair of silver tweezers, examined under lantern light, then flicked into a bowl already half full of fur that might well be sacred by now. He mutters as he works. Damp hair ruins tone. Dry hair bends pitch. Long hair, disaster. You nod slowly, trying to look wise, but you can't help asking, why not just use different strings? He pauses, looks up at you like you've asked why they don't play with spoons and call it jazz. Because she chose this string. You glance at the cat nearby, a regal gray puffball perched on the windowsill like a music critic in exile. She blinks at you, then turns away, bored. Welcome to the deep end of Ottoman instrument care, where the cat's fur is not just tolerated, it's consulted. This particular you learn is part of the soft string series, reserved for indoor evening performances when wind from the Bosphorus could carry away sound like a thief. The string in question, goat, gut, hand-wrapped, scented with rose oil, and the cat's tail brushed against it the night before, which, to this man, is not a problem. It's a data point. You watch as he reaches into a cedar box and removes a second, slightly frizzled string, this one already flecked with strands of calico fur. He winds it carefully, muttering in rhythm to the twists, one for tone, one for breath, one for fur. Historians still argue whether Ottoman musicians believed in literal sound contamination or whether this was simply superstition, ritualized into routine. Some letters suggest musicians blamed bad performances on agitated feline essence, while others contain recipes for cleansing string tea made from mint, saffron, and whatever whiskers were left in the tuning room that week. You're beginning to realize the cat was not just a tempo model. She was an unwelcome yet unavoidable participant in the making of every note. A drummer joins the scene. She places a square of soft felt over her darbuka and sits cross-legged. She hums quietly and begins tightening the skin, not by sight, but by vibe. Literally, she flicks the edge, then watches the cat's tail. If it twitches, the drum is too tight. If it doesn't move, she tightens further. It's absurd. It's genius. You can't tell which. A third musician enters, this one balancing a rebab on his hip like a sleeping child. He kneels, lays the instrument beside the window cat, and waits, not to play, to observe. He's watching the angle of the cat's ears. Apparently, ears forward means pitch is sharp. Ears sideways, too flat, ears flicking randomly. You're either cursed or it's feeding time. He adjusts his pegs. The cat's ears twitch, then settle. Perfect. One fringe record scribbled into the margin of a Persian translation of Galen suggests some Ottoman musicians believed cats carried magnetism in their fur, which subtly pulled at the metal strings. While likely pseudoscience, it's worth noting that more than one tuning fork was stored in a box lined with cat hair rather than silk. You sit now in the corner, sipping thick, cardamom slick coffee offered by a passing apprentice. The smell of tuning oil mingles with the faint, toasted scent of the copper brazier nearby. The musicians work quietly checking strings, adjusting tuning pegs, and occasionally brushing cat hair off their sleeves like it's no more offensive than pollen. A nearby Kanun player sighs. She won't lie on the frame anymore. Not since spring. You glance at the cat again. Too much tension. He adds, she likes the fall tuning better, cooler strings. You nod, as if you, too, can sense the pitch shift of seasonal humidity on feline mood. You can't, but you're learning. One of the tuning assistants brings over a small bowl of olive oil and lemon rind, used for softening the frets of the oud. The cat sniffs the air, stretches, and lets out a low, approving chirp. The player immediately begins applying the oil. The approval is apparently binding. And somehow, through all this, no one complains. No one jokes. It isn't eccentricity anymore. It's craft. You watch the oud player finish winding the string. He holds it gently with both hands, raises it toward the cat, and bows. She yawns. He nods solemnly and returns to his bench. The oud now holds a sound just slightly warmer than before, not because of the tuning, but because every person in the room believes it's warmer. And if the cat believes it too, well, that's music. You wake to silence that isn't empty, it's deliberate. A silence held like breath at the top of a prayer. It's morning, or something close to it. The light filtering through the arched window is soft and pewter-colored, the kind of sky that hasn't decided if it wants to rain or just linger. You stretch on your cushion, stiff from sleep, and realize no music has played for hours. But no one is panicking, because today is marked on the palace calendar not as rehearsal or performance, but something far stranger, the cat's deep nap cycle. You rub your eyes and blink at the schedule board on the far wall, an ornate wooden display carved with moon phases and floral motifs. Under today's date, in gold calligraphy, it reads simply, no ensemble rehearsal. Observe stillness. Respect feline hibernation. You think it's a joke until you step into the music hall. Every instrument has been lowered to the floor, every cushion turned outward, every window cracked slightly for airflow. And across the room, 6 cats sleeping like tiny deities. One curled in a drum, one sprawled across sheet music, 2 in an open timbre case, and another cradled between the strings of a harp as though woven there on purpose. The musicians are present but hushed, moving in slow patterns like monks in a cloister. They polish fingerboards, oil reeds, restitch soft instrument bags. No one plays, no one even hums, because during the imperial nap cycle, sound is forbidden. Historians still debate whether this ritual was rooted in science or superstition. Some argue it was born of humidity-based maintenance needs, a forced break to prevent overuse of gut strings and drying out of drum skins. Others insist it was more metaphysical, an offering of silence to keep the palace cats guardians of tone, interpreters of breath from becoming overstimulated. You drift past a young apprentice sweeping dust with a fan of peacock feathers. She doesn't raise her eyes but mouths, "Don't disturb the white one." She's dreaming a melody. You're not sure whether she's teasing or deadly serious. You move to the side corridor, where the tea master is setting out small ceramic cups filled with an herbal infusion. Not for the humans, for the cats. He explains, barely above a whisper, that they brew a tea of chamomile, valerian, and lemon balm, not to be consumed, but to scent the room. The cats sleep better, and their sleep, in turn, ensures that the next performance arrives. Tuned. One tabby stirs. Immediately, two musicians pause mid-polish. She rolls, adjusts her spine, resettles. The work continues. A fringe account in a Scottish traveler's diary from 1821 describes this tradition with confusion and awe. He writes, "The Ottomans, so fierce in battle, do cower in silence before a snoring beast the size of a slipper." He seemed unimpressed, but he also noted the unparalleled softness of the music that followed these silent mornings. He called it sound drawn from breath rather than force. You tiptoe into the far corner, where a narrow balcony overlooks the inner courtyard. Below, a musician is watering the orange trees, and the birds have learned to avoid the fountain today. They seem to understand what even most guests do not. Music cannot flow if the cats do not sleep. Inside, someone knocks over a ceramic bowl. It lands on a silk pillow with a muffled thump. All heads turn. The nearest cat flattens one ear. The entire room freezes. You don't breathe. But the ear rights itself. The tail twitches once, and the moment passes. Still, the musician responsible lowers their head. No scolding, no laughter, only the soft return to ritual. You pass by the conductor's writing desk, where a ledger sits open, dated with today's entry. No rehearsal, 3 full naps. 1 partial dream. See Rebab 4, cat's breath slowest at 10. 12. May will attempt tuning after dusk if mood permits. You grin. And somehow, you understand it. These aren't just logs, they're weather reports, emotional forecasts based on fur and sleep. A page near the end of the book is marked with a ribbon. It reads, "Imperial nap schedules must not be disturbed except in war, earthquake, or extreme tonal emergency." You're too afraid to ask what counts as an extreme tonal emergency. And now, as the sky brightens just enough to tint the marble pink, the musicians gather not to play but to sit in listening posture, legs crossed, backs straight, palms resting on thighs, eyes closed, ears open. The cats sleep, the humans wait, and you, somewhere between visitor and disciple now, sit with them, listening to the slow breath of 6 animals guiding the sound of an empire not with roar or command, but with a nap. The smell hits you before the doorway does. Warm lamb, stewed lentils, something spiced and slightly burnt. You follow it into the back wing of the palace kitchens, where copper pots hang like suspended suns and steam wraps around every corner like a lazy ghost. This isn't the main dining hall. This is the musician's kitchen, tucked behind the courtyard and overseen not by chefs, but by a rotating council of percussionists who swear they know how to boil rice better than they keep time. You're not here for lunch. You're here for the debate. 3 musicians crouch near the hearth, arguing with the intensity of rival philosophers and the vocabulary of stubborn cat owners. "She purrs more with fish," says the man stirring the pot of pilaf. "She purrs longer with cream," says the woman chopping dates. "She purrs best when not annoyed by your talking," mutters the old man, trying to coax a tabby into sniffing a bowl of broth. Today's discussion: what to feed the cats to encourage the ideal purring tone. You choke on a laugh, but no one else finds this funny. This is not about pampering. This is about acoustic consistency. They're trying to engineer the ideal nap, the most rhythmically pure purring cycle possible, so that tomorrow's tuning can be calibrated precisely to the waveform of feline contentment. Historians still argue whether this practice had real scientific merit or was simply the result of too many idle hours between court performances. One surviving pantry log from 1767 shows entire monthly budgets dedicated to whitefish reserves for tonal coaxing and cinnamon milk cat. 2 cups. You perch on a stool near the fire and watch a small black kitten lap gently at a shallow dish of warm yogurt and mint. Her purr begins at a faint engine hum, then levels out into a perfect, low-frequency buzz. The 3 musicians go silent. They look at one another. She's doing the D. One of them says, "No, that's an F. It's between." They all nod solemnly, as if this changes everything. Nearby, a 5th musician enters holding a reed flute. He gently matches his breath to the kitten's purr, adjusting his embouchure until the vibrations align. He doesn't play, he just listens. The kitten flicks her tail once, He adjusts again. Now she curls tighter and closes her eyes. Success. One fringe pamphlet written by a tea courier turned amateur musicologist suggested that Ottoman musicians once developed a full tuning scale based on cat digestive cycles. The theory goes, feed, wait 40 minutes, and observe the purr. A belly full of lamb produced low tones. Lentils trended higher. Fish, notoriously unpredictable, sometimes cause tonal dissonance mid-purr. No formal record confirms this, but given what you're seeing today, it doesn't seem that far-fetched. A ceramic bowl breaks in the next room. Instantly, the kitchen hushes. All eyes turn to the kitten, still purring. They exhale in relief. She's stable, someone murmurs. You glance down at the chart drawn in chalk near the hearth columns labeled meal. Time of purr onset. Duration. Observed pitch. It's not a joke. It's data. One cell is marked with a skull and crossbones. You point to it. Oversalted anchovy stew. The rice stirrer whispers. She vibrated in triplets for 2 hours. Nearly derailed the entire Conan section. You sip from a cup of slightly bitter tea and watch as the old man finally wins over the cat curled on the window ledge. He coaxes her toward a flat board resting on a linen pillow. She steps onto it like it's a stage, sniffs once, then lays down. The conductor enters just then. He nods at the scene. Then at you. We'll try tuning again tomorrow. If the mood holds, he's holding a slip of parchment, and you catch a glance of the script. It's a schedule meal rotation for optimal resonance. There are 4 categories: lulling, neutral, disruptive, and dangerous. The last one is circled in red. Under it, overripe melon. No exceptions. You're trying to imagine a royal performance ruined by a slightly gassy tabby when the flute player beside you speaks. She once purred in 5/4 time after melon. Nearly broke the nay section. You nod slowly. Of course, the argument over cream versus fish continues in the background. Now, with added debate over serving temperature, the consensus: warm, but not hot. Cold food makes the cat sleepy in the wrong way, numb, not relaxed. Sleep must be intentional. One musician reaches for a thick, leather-bound book labeled Feline Acoustics, Vol. Brie. Inside, a series of illustrations shows cross-sections of cats in sleeping positions, each paired with musical recommendations for tuning, plucking angle, and breath depth. You have officially passed through the looking glass, and now, as the kitten's purring slows into a gentle hum, the musicians begin packing up their bowls, folding cloths, brushing errant whiskers from the counters. The room clears. No formal conclusion. No winner to the cream fish debate. Only this: the cats are fed. They are pleased, and tomorrow's music just might be in tune. The rain arrives like a secret. It doesn't announce itself so much as appear. You're on the upper walkway when you first notice it. A soft hiss, a deepening of shadows, the faint rustle of leaves like an ensemble tuning before the first note. Below you, the stone tiles of the courtyard begin to darken, slow patches of deep gray spreading like spilled ink, and atop those stones, unmoving, unsheltered, unbothered, lie 3 cats. They don't run. They don't blink. They simply absorb the rain as though it were part of the score. You follow the scent of wet stone and soaked jasmine into the rain pavilion, a sheltered terrace tucked beneath sweeping eaves carved with musical motifs. No walls, only curtains of mist. The space is empty except for a collection of lanterns and a stack of dry towels folded too neatly to have been used. This is the place where rain songs are born. You've heard rumors that the sound of rain on cat fur once inspired an entire school of modal experimentation. That certain cats prefer to nap in drizzle rather than sun. That some musicians used to practice beneath eaves, hoping a downpour might bring their preferred feline collaborator into the open. Historians still debate whether these roof cats were random strays or a carefully maintained colony of weather-attuned muses. One 18th century notation book contains a margin sketch of a drenched tabby curled atop a dulcimer, labeled simply Divine Tempo, Overcast, Northwest Wind. You take a seat on the outer bench and watch as a cat pads onto the marble, wet but radiant. her striped fur clinging to her ribs in little rivulets. She pauses, then curls herself atop a dry patch of silk cloth. Her purr doesn't start immediately. It waits. The musicians arrive in slow intervals, carrying their instruments wrapped in wool, their fingers red from the cold. They nod to the cat, each one. Not casually, not out of habit, but in acknowledgement, like scholars entering a lecture already in progress. A ney player tests the air, breathes deeply through his nose, then unwraps his reed flute. He doesn't play it yet. He holds it like an antenna. The rain ticks across the stone. The cat's chest rises, and then a single note, low, soft, exhaled like regret. It barely registers above the downpour. A frame drum joins. Brushed, not struck, not rhythm, texture. The cat blinks. The musicians watch. You watch them watching her, and it becomes clear the tempo isn't in the sound. It's in the watching, in the act of patience, in the choice to wait until the cat shifts, stretches, adjusts, curls tighter, and to let that movement become the downbeat. A fringe theory once suggested that Ottoman rain songs weren't composed at all. They were observed. The musician wasn't a creator but a transcriber. The composition already existed in the world, in raindrops, in paw steps, in how the sound of thunder made a cat flicker tail twice and yawn. And so you sit there, in the rain pavilion, while the music, if you can call it that, begins to form. It doesn't arrive like melody, it arrives like weather. Bits of udi, a shimmer from the kanun, the tiniest shake of a tambourine, maybe accidental, maybe sacred. The cat stretches one long front paw extended, claws half out, tail a question mark. The rhythm shifts. A musician nods. You notice that no one here carries sheet music. The only paper present is a scroll tucked into the tambour case, labeled Sky Readings. Cat-dependent. No notes. Just weather forecasts and sketchy diagrams of sleeping feline posture mapped against modes. One of the apprentices enters with a tray of small brass bowls, not tea ashes from burnt cedar and orange peel, placed around the edges of the pavilion to scent the air. Why? You don't ask. But the cat breathes deeper once the bowls are set. That seems to be reason enough. Rain songs are never fast. They're never bold. They exist in that space where you've forgotten to be impatient, where silence is as valid as sound. You hear a single rebab stroke that could have been a sigh, another that could have been the cat's stomach. You glance upward, water beads across the eaves, falling at uneven intervals. Some of the musicians begin aligning their notes to the drip pattern. You're not imagining it. There's a rhythm to the leaks. The leaks become percussion, and the cat, she finally purrs, not loudly, not consistently, but audibly enough that two flautists adjust their tuning. You wonder how many songs were born exactly this way? Not on purpose, not with an audience. Just in the space where sound is allowed to drift toward meaning without being forced. A musician near you leans over and whispers, "She's tuned to the roof today." You nod. You have no idea what it means, but it feels correct. And as the rain softens into mist, and the last purr stretches into silence, you understand something the cats always knew. The best music isn't played. It's waited for. It's not the music that draws you this time, it's the paw print. Faint, imperfect, but unmistakably there. A single dusty paw print stamped across the edge of a yellowing music manuscript. Right where the notation swells into what must have been a crescendo, the ink underneath is slightly smudged. The curve of the paw just grazing the downstroke of a scale. You imagine the moment perhaps the cat walked across the desk as the composer stepped away for tea, or maybe she simply sat there for hours, slowly imprinting herself into history. You reach for the manuscript. The paper crackles like dry leaves. This is no ordinary sheet music, it's part of the Topkapi scroll, a hand-copied collection of experimental court compositions, annotated by dozens of musicians over the course of nearly 70 years. Some pages are filled with notations and formal stamps. Others have only scattered notes, doodles, strange diagrams. One page, inexplicably, contains only a drawing of a sleeping cat and the phrase tempo. If she stirs, you've gone too fast. You're in the library of breath, the most silent wing of the palace. The room smells of lemon ink, beeswax polish, and time. Every desk has a glass sheet overlaying the manuscripts, protecting them from the oils on human fingers. But the cat paw prints, they remain. You're not the first to notice them. There's even a catalog paw marks and pressure points in early Ottoman scores, written by a violinist-turned-scribe who became obsessed with the idea that cats weren't interrupting music, but shaping it. Historians still argue whether these feline intrusions were seen as nuisances or sacred accidents. Some claim composers would rewrite entire passages to accommodate where a cat's paw had blurred the ink. Others believed it was a kind of omen. If the cat crosses the page, cross out the measure. You flip through another folio and find 3 successive pages, each with faint paw prints, perfectly spaced, as though a feline had paced in deliberate rhythm across the score. The tempo notes next to them, steady, unbothered. Play until the breath falters, a fringe belief, preserved only in the footnotes of a musicologist who likely spent too much time in the archives, suggests that one court composer developed an entire notation system inspired by cat paws, dots for toes, dashes for pads. The resulting music was often described as unplayable and purring-shaped, but still earned him a minor pension and a private rehearsal room filled with pillows. You walk past a locked cabinet labeled unfinished, due to feline intervention. One page behind the glass is marked with a red ribbon and a handwritten note. She sat on this measure for 3 days. We gave up. A music apprentice enters, arms full of freshly copied scores. She kneels and begins organizing the shelves by tone and theme, but not alphabetically. Instead, she pauses at each score and waits. Sometimes she lifts it slightly. Sometimes she sniffs it. Once, she even lays a sheet flat and watches the way the dust settles on it. Then she shelves it accordingly. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Some pages want to sleep near silence. Others like proximity to minor keys. She points to a shelf with 3 visible paw prints stamped across a score titled Concerto for Rain, Lantern, and Tail, a legend. She explains, never played publicly. The only existing copy bears a clear double paw print, mid-page, and the final instruction, repeat until she wakes up. You cross to the reading bench, the soft leather cold under your fingers, and unroll a newer scroll. This one has no paw prints yet, just clean staves, crisp ink, and a faint outline where someone began sketching a cat into the corner. Perhaps in hope, perhaps in memory, the musicians enter, one by one, to copy segments for rehearsal, but today, they don't rush. One of them pauses to lay down a folded square of silk on the desk before setting a sheet music down. For when she returns, he says, you ask, does she always come? He shrugs. If the page is warm enough, and as you leave the library of breath, your steps slow, careful. You glance back at the old manuscript with the paw print smudge. It occurs to you that in the vast web of notes and lines, theories and breaths, it might be the smallest paw-shaped interruption that made the music matter at all. It's well past midnight, the hour when even the fountains forget to gurgle, and the air in the rehearsal hall is heavy with jasmine and burnt sesame oil. You follow the flickering path of candlelight toward the central courtyard, where something unusual is happening. A group of musicians has gathered in silence, huddled around a table covered in folded cloths, measuring rods, and a scattering of whiskers, actual cat whiskers, some straight, some curled, some set neatly between copper rulers as if preparing for surgery or spellcraft. You pause in the doorway. No one looks up. A man with ink-stained hands dips a brush into dark dye and marks the length of a whisker on parchment, whispering, 8.4. We're within range. Within range of what? You inch closer and realize what you're watching. A midnight tuning session based on whisker lengths. The theory is as absurd as it is intricate, and somehow, it makes perfect sense here. According to the man now aligning the whiskers next to lute strings, a cat's whisker is as long as its mood allows. Measure the whisker, and you measure the breath. Measure the breath, and you find your harmony. A fringe manuscript tucked inside the palace's disavowed collection. The Book of Silent Strings claims that the court once experimented with using whisker lengths as string spacing guides for new instruments, not for tuning pitch, but for tuning feeling. The idea being, if a string layout felt comfortable enough for a cat to sleep on, it was comfortable enough for the soul. You watch as one of the women lifts a connon string slightly and slides a paper-thin whisker beneath it. No buzz, she says. She'd sleep through it. They nod as though they've just solved a murder. Nearby, a short-necked tambour sits in pieces, its bridge disassembled, its strings laid flat. Around it are 5 whiskers arranged in a pattern that looks disturbingly like a star chart. This one slept under the drumskin last week, someone murmurs. Left side or center? Left. Tail curled inward. Heavy purr. Full whisker drop. That's apparently enough to adjust the pegs by a half turn. You suppress a laugh until you see the chart hanging on the nearby wall. A full diagram, 12 positions of feline sleep mapped against instrument alignment and vibrational philosophy. Crescent curl. Tune sharp. Side sprawl. Tune flat. Head tucked under paw. Play in minor, full stretch across strings, cancel rehearsal and offer salmon. Historians still debate whether this was genuine musical theory or the result of some long-standing inside joke that the court never felt the need to explain. But multiple letters reference musicians bringing bundles of measured whiskers to the royal tuner, like some sort of blessed dowry. One letter tucked into the back of a trade ledger reads, "She left 4 this morning. 2 were bent. I am worried the new reed tuning is off balance. Requesting time to recalibrate the dulcimer if her mood doesn't stabilize by Thursday." The musicians around you work with the solemnity of clockmakers. Each whisker is stored in a labeled silk envelope. Some are tagged by cat name, others by season. One envelope simply says unknown, but graceful. One of the players begins to hum a slow, looping tone that follows no melody. Another begins to pluck at strings not yet tightened, letting them rattle softly. Like a breeze brushing wind chimes with hesitation. In the corner, a kitten curls atop a parchment scroll and begins to purr. Immediately, everyone stops. The lead tuner lifts one whisker from the table and holds it toward the kitten like a sacred object. The purring continues. He nods. "This one." "Then," he says. He threads the whisker between 2 fingerboards, secures it gently, and resumes adjusting the strings around it. The sound shifts, rounding, deepening, as if even the instrument is sighing in gratitude. One musician leans over to whisper, "She won't sleep near badly tuned strings. Never has." You ask, "What happens if she does?" He shrugs. "We don't play them." You realize there's no arrogance here, only obedience to something softer than rules. It's not about precision. It's about invitation. Will the cat sleep near your instrument? Will she breathe without interruption while you play? If yes, then you found something worth playing. And so the tuning continues not by ear, not by theory, but by the silent approval of one purring dreamer and the length of her whiskers. You sit quietly on the floor, listening to the whisper of silk and the creak of strings, and you wonder how many melodies were born not from inspiration or skill, but from the barely noticed shift of a cat deciding to rest. You're halfway through your second cup of bitter night tea when it happens, the moment every palace musician whispers about but few have ever witnessed. The cat snores, not a cute, fluttery puff of sound, a deep, rumbling snore, rolled out like thunder from beneath a blanket of fur and confidence. It echoes just enough to set off a ripple across the rehearsal hall, an audible flinch among the ensemble. A string player gasps softly. A ney player lowers his reed. One of the apprentices mouths "It's happening," and immediately starts scribbling something into a side ledger labeled "Feline Disruptions, Emergency Scenarios." You blink. You've heard about this. It's called "The Day the Cat Snored," and apparently, it changes everything. See, a purr is steady, predictable, usable, but a snore, that's wild energy. It breaks rhythm. It commands a new form. You watch as the conductor enters, not hurried, not calm, focused. He strides directly to the cat, an orange and white matron curled on a cushion by the main canon, and kneels beside her. He waits, times her breathing. The snore returns, slightly longer this time, with a strange harmonic hic at the end. He closes his eyes. Then he raises one hand. A ney whispers a note not in rhythm with the cat's breath now, but in mimicry of the snore's pulse. The canon follows. Then a low frame drum begins to tremble, not with steady beat, but with syncopation bursts and stutters and stretches. You realize you're hearing something completely different, an improvised form shaped not by the calm of sleep, but by its interruption. Historians still argue whether this musical style, later dubbed snore mode, was truly based on feline behavior or simply a convenient metaphor for improvisational license. There are preserved compositions labeled Dream Break in G minor and snooze variations on a tambour theme that seem to match the jagged, irregular rhythms unfolding in front of you now. But you know this isn't metaphor. The musicians aren't pretending. They're following the cat every strange wheeze and warble, each nasal flutter, each silence between snores. The entire ensemble shifts as one, bending their tempo like reeds in unpredictable wind. The frame drum player begins tapping the outer rim in erratic bursts, mimicking the cat's exhale pattern. The kanun echoes with a metallic shimmer that sounds like the quiet complaint of old wood adjusting to a weight it didn't expect. Then the cat coughs in her sleep. Everything halts. Even the lanterns seem to dim for a moment. You hear someone whisper, "Do not interpret that." Another replies, "Too late. He's already tuned to it." Indeed, one oud player has already plucked a descending line that mirrors the wheezing rhythm. It's haunting, gorgeous, a little silly, and utterly sincere. A fringe music text found only in the margins of a much more respectable book on calligraphy suggests that one year, the entire palace ensemble composed an annual performance piece inspired by that cat's snoring cycle alone. The text insists that the final movement, a piece titled The Velvet Wheeze, was so emotionally overwhelming that two musicians fainted and one broke into tears. You're starting to understand how, because what's happening now isn't just music, it's intimacy. Rendered in tone, the ensemble's eyes never leave the cat. The snore deepens. The melody slows. The conductor lowers his hand, and for a moment only a breath, the cat goes silent. The musicians freeze. Then, with all the dramatic flourish of a diva re-entering the stage, the cat lets loose a double snore. Complete with twitching ear and a small kick of one hind leg, the room breaks into quiet. Reverent laughter. The music resumes, looser now, playful, as though acknowledging that even perfection must bow before a good snore. One apprentice scribbles a final note into her log, snores logged. 6. Average interval, 43 seconds. Tonal influence. Syncopated breath loop, felt in rebab vibrato. 1 emotional impact. Group-wide grinning. You look down at your cup, now cold. It doesn't matter. You've just heard something that shouldn't work but does. The cat stretches once, makes a strange little perk sound, and rolls over. The snores stop. The ensemble waits. They don't resume the earlier mode. They don't try to recreate what's past. Instead, they bow their heads. The conductor speaks quietly. "That was her form. We won't play it again." And just like that, the scroll is rolled. The instruments are lowered. The room exhales. Because the cat snored, and that meant something. You duck behind a velvet drape just in time to avoid a procession of silk robes and nervous glances. The ambassadors have arrived, 3 men and 1 woman, each wearing layers of color-coded diplomacy, trailing scented attendants and scribes with more ink than expressions. They're here to witness a performance, a gift from the empire, a gesture of alliance, or perhaps a carefully composed trap disguised as culture. The setting, the imperial music chamber, the stakes, higher than they know. What none of them have yet realized is that the performance doesn't begin when the musicians take their seats. It begins when the cat chooses where to sit. You slip into the back of the room as quietly as possible. It's already full of whispering anticipation. Every musician is in place, every instrument tuned, every lantern trimmed, and at the center of the stage, an empty cushion. A hush spreads, and then she arrives, a slim black and white cattail high, gait unbothered. The kind of creature that knows every room is already hers, steps into the center like a diplomat without a country. The musicians lower their heads. The conductor nods. The ambassadors are confused. One leans to his translator and asks, too loudly, "Is that part of the ritual?" The translator hesitates, then says, "Yes, she is the timing device." The ambassador blinks. "Excuse me." Historians still argue whether this level of feline integration into court performances was exaggerated by foreign accounts. Some described it as charming eccentricity. Others, like the Austrian envoy in 1775, called it a profound insult, stormed out during the tuning, and later confessed to a deep-seated fear of cats. But the Ottomans, they weren't trying to impress outsiders. They were tuning to something no treaty could dictate. The cat yawns. She turns once, twice, then settles atop the velvet cushion in a perfect loaf, one paw out, chin tucked, eyes closed. That's the signal. The neigh begins, slow, smooth, breath-shaped, a sound that starts behind the rib cage and ends somewhere behind your ears. The canon joins, its strings softened with silk bands to dampen resonance. This isn't a concert. It's a ceremony of breath. You glance at the ambassadors again. The woman leans forward slightly. Her eyes flicker not from boredom, but recognition. She knows this isn't for them. That's what makes it powerful. The other guests shift uncomfortably. One coughs, immediately mortified by the noise. Another tries to scribble notes but stops when the scratch of his quill draws stares. Meanwhile, the cat sighs. That's all just a sigh. But two musicians immediately adjust tempo. You're not sure if the ambassadors notice. You're not sure it matters. Because here, in this palace, diplomacy doesn't run on clocks. It runs on cats. One fringe document preserved in the margins of a musical treatise suggests that an Ottoman negotiator once delayed a signing ceremony by 9 hours, claiming, "We cannot conclude under flat breath. The imperial cat has not yet snored." Whether this was an excuse or a sincere condition is unknown. But the story survives. Back in the chamber, the melody builds slowly, not louder, deeper. The rebab adds a line that feels like silk drawn across stone. The cat's tail flicks once, and the conductor gives a barely perceptible nod. The tempo slows again. One of the scribes near the ambassadors whispers, "Are they watching her?" "Yes," the translator replies. "All of us are." The music moves through modes that seem to follow no Western logic. Tonality. Here, a river. Not a staircase. Notes are meant to drift, not rise. Cadence is something you feel in the belly, not something that lands with applause. And still, the cat does not stir. The players are pouring everything they have into this moment, not for power, not for show, but for harmony with a creature who could stand up and walk out at any moment and ruin the entire thing. That's the risk. That's the art. And then it happens. She opens one eye, stretches, turns in a slow circle, and rests her head facing the other direction. The musicians pivot instantly. The ensemble reverses the melodic direction. What was ascending becomes descending. What was steady becomes bending. You'd never guess it wasn't written that way, but it wasn't. This isn't composition. It's flattery. The performance ends without crescendo, just a long, shared breath. The final note hovers, fading not into silence, but into the cat's slow exhale. There is no applause, just stillness. Then, finally, the conductor speaks. She allowed it. The ambassadors don't know whether to clap. One does. Two follow, awkwardly. The woman simply bows her head, her expression unreadable. You slip out before the questions begin. You don't need answers. You already know the truth. The cat wasn't the performer. She was the standard. And they met it. The last performance is never the loudest. It's the softest. You're standing in the shadow of the winter rehearsal hall, a place carved from old stone and warmed only by body heat, breath, and the silent weight of memory. The lanterns here are dimmer, the instruments older. The air carries a scent of walnut oil, singed incense, and something faded like the last page of a letter someone couldn't finish writing. Tonight's session is different. There are fewer musicians, fewer notes, no scribes, no apprentices, just a circle of elder players, seated on wide cushions, their backs curved like commas. And in the center, wrapped in gold silk and resting on a folded brocade pillow, is the oldest cat in the palace. She doesn't move much anymore. Her breathing is shallow. Her eyes stay closed. Her fur has grayed around the ears, but she is still the center of the room. This is her final concert. The musicians don't weep. They don't tremble. They tune quietly, carefully, not to the rhythm of breath anymore, but to the memory of it. One by one, they begin to play not melodies, but fragments, repetitions, hints of pieces played years ago, echoes. You recognize some of them. The snore piece from the Rain Pavilion, a descending motif from the garden lullaby, a single bowed note that once mimicked a sigh during the fish versus cream debate. Each gesture is an offering. Historians still argue whether this final concert tradition was formalized or simply happened whenever an imperial cat was approaching the end of her ninth life. Some say it was an unscheduled ritual. Others claim it was whispered into the calendar in invisible ink. A fringe tale preserved in the margins of a poem describes a musician who once refused to play a farewell performance. His instrument refused to stay in tune for the rest of his life. When he died, it was found with whiskers wound into the tuning pegs. Tonight, though, there is no refusal, only reverence. The music drapes itself around the old cat like a second blanket. She stirs once. Her ear twitches. Someone adjusts their cord. You watch the conductor raise his hand not to begin anything, but to hold it still, open, as if waiting for permission. And when the cat exhales, so softly you almost miss it, he lowers his hand. A knee breathes a final note. It fades. No one plays after. No applause. No speeches. Only stillness. You step outside, into the quiet garden. The sky is dark now, that deep navy reserved for endings. The trees stand like sentinels. The fountain has paused. Somewhere nearby, a cat pads softly across tile. A younger one perhaps, chasing her own shadow. And in that moment, you realize it wasn't just that they tuned to her breath. It's that they let her tell them when silence should begin. You close your eyes. You breathe once. You let it go. And now, as we drift away from the palace halls, the gardens soaked in purring rhythm, the lanterns flickering behind slowly closing doors, you let the images soften in your mind. No more tuning forks or reed flutes. No more sandalwood floorboards worn by slippers and paws. Only the memory of breath slow, steady, curled in a patch of sunlight that no longer needs a window to exist. Let the music fade into your body like an echo remembered, not replayed. Feel the hush of the rehearsal room settle along your shoulders, the silk of that final silence winding itself gently around your thoughts. There's nothing left to interpret, no measures to count, only stillness and a rhythm so gentle, you no longer need to follow it. You become it. The old cat sleeps now, truly sleeps, and maybe the next song will come from another breath, another kitten stretching across a quanun, or maybe it won't. That's not your worry. For now, you've heard the tune, you've felt the pause, you've let the silence in, and maybe, just maybe, you're breathing with it now. Good. Stay here as long as you like. The story won't rush you.